A quick reminder, this session is being recorded. Good morning. Welcome to our workshop on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom. Thank you again for being here with us today to dive into the work being done across the city to advance equity for students in the school district of Philadelphia and to move forward toward a space of hope and healing. For this workshop, we have two amazing CAPA High School seniors, Gabby Rodriguez and Sophia Roach, who will be leading us through a workshop that focuses on creating the conditions for student-led equity work at the school level. Gabby Rodriguez is a Philadelphia-based young Latinx multimedia creator and artist. They are also the president of the Bullhorn News, Philadelphia's independent student-run newspaper. They love making documentary films and encouraging conversations about identity in the Latinx community outside of work. Sophia Roach is a senior writing major at CAPA High School, editor-in-chief of the Bullhorn News, and involved in the school district by acting as one of the two student representatives on the Board of Education. Alongside Gabby, Sophia is the vice president of the Latinx Club. She hopes to continue her advocacy in the future by pursuing a career in international human rights. I will now turn it over to Gabby to get us started.
Okay, well, hello everyone. So this is really exciting. This is the first time me and Sophia are presenting this in front of a whole group. So very exciting. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. If you see me looking over here, I'm not ignoring anyone. I just have everything on my second monitor. So we're going to start. And yeah, so this, as was explained, we're going to go over diversity, equity, and inclusion, but integrated into the classroom. And this is all from me and Sophia's experience, because personally at our high school, we already started this process and we started having like actual in-based workshops and in-based lessons within certain class periods. And they happen like monthly. But basically this work started all, just to give a little bit of background, it started with just town halls, especially over COVID and during the pandemic when a lot of the things that were going on with like the Black Lives Matter movement. So we had a whole town hall just to talk about that as a community. And then from there, it led to a lot of other issues that were arising within the school environment that needed to be talked about, whether those issues had to do with like certain races or whether those issues had to do with like, when I mean certain races, I mean like personal issues when it comes to discrimination, and whether those issues had to do with like understanding privilege or understanding what your words mean, microaggressions, things of that nature. So to get on the way, a little introduction. Sophia, you can go.
Hello, are you able to hear me? Okay, good. Hello, my name's Sophia. I use she, her pronouns. Like Gabby, I'm a senior at CAPA. And I started with DEI when we had individual committees, and I started more so on the curriculum development side, working to make sure our curriculum was more inclusive by like adding more inclusive required reading books. But we kind of developed away from that and more into like specific in classroom education.
Yeah, and I'm Gabby Rodriguez. I use they, them pronouns. And I started when we were doing more like online, but town hall. So yeah, I helped with more of like the town hall things and the workshop things. We're going to get more into like what those workshops are, but I created too many slideshows over my time doing this. And it taught me a lot of slideshow skills. So going on, Sophia's going to take it from here on like, what does it look like in the classroom?
So DEI obviously was really unique to our school, and it was successful because we had a lot of different ways to kind of engage students, because like basically our whole platform was catered towards students. So how we think that a successful school DEI committee could look like is organization by students for students, making sure that the staff focuses on DEI, but kind of in a separate way, and also supports us through moderation. And it's less of like a teacher educating the students and more like students having open conversations with other students. So with that, we also made sure that there were no power imbalances or leadership differences. Like we don't have a president of the DEI committee, we just have student leaders. So it's all kind of like based on equal contribution. So the administration-led equity work, like I mentioned, was separate from the student work. And basically they just did separate workshops that were more based on like how to promote, for example, how to promote an anti-racist classroom, or they would do book clubs, things of that nature that were a little bit different from the direct instruction workshops that we were doing. And we chose to do this because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't seen as a top-down mandate. Like I mentioned, like it wasn't just teachers educating students, it was us having conversations with other students.
And this came up in conversation a lot. This was really important because there was also, which we'll get into later, but there was also like issues with students and teachers. So it would be
Yes.
really hard to address that in a like environment where it feels like teachers are just constantly monitoring and constantly like being on top of the conversation that's being had. So a little
Definitely.
bit, oh, Sophia, I'm sorry, did you want to say add on that?
No, that was good.
So a little bit of like how we kind of plan this out. We did like a 5-month lesson plan covering like 5 different topics like each month. It was supposed to be weekly, but we found out that did not work in a school setting. So learning from mistakes. And basically we're going to get into like how it looked like, and I'm going to show how it looked like, but it contained like the layout, an outline of the workshops and the topics and expectations for participants. I'm going to show more of like the outline of workshops and kind of the activities, because it was very interactive, and that's what our goal was. And we just shared a document where it was like I had a schedule. We also had a separate document that had like a DEI event calendar, because it was important to plan out like what student leaders are going to what classrooms, what days. Having a whole Google Classroom for it as well was really helpful. And we made sure to keep in line with the student handbook contract. So we made sure to like make a whole thing for this. And I'm going to share the document, and I'm going to make this a little bit of an interactive activity. So let me stop my screen sharing real quick, get off of present mode, and pull up the document. Sophia, could you share the document in the chat?
Yes, I am on my iPad right now, so give me a few seconds.
Mm-hmm. So as we go through this document, I would love if you guys could comment things that you notice when Sophia shares it in the chat, and I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. The little template that we have that me and Sophia edited together. So this was the template that we mostly shared within like going over what we had to do day by day. We usually sat in like classrooms and went over this. One classroom we went over this that was made for DEI work, and it was just basically going over what we should do. Yeah, Sophia shared it in the chat. So as I kind of like quickly go over the outline just to give a visual aspect of what this work looked like, I would love if everyone should be able to comment. Let me know if you can't, but you can comment things that you notice that are helpful and things that are like good to outline. So we always started with like a contract. So at the first day of workshops, we gave this contract to all of the students, and we read it line by line, paragraph by paragraph, and kind of went over why this is important for us. Why is this important for the school environment? Why is it important for you? Kind of relating it back to the student itself. Then we have the outlines for each month workshop. It was like we first went over introductions in the beginning for the first month, kind of like who we were, because a lot of students still didn't know DEI work or even what DEI meant. We went over like identity wheels and things like that, but it had to do with a lot of like activities, which is like what this warm up was, an identity wheel, kind of looking at your various identities and then discussing in the class. And then we always closed out with like a reflection question, kind of reflecting back at the conversation that we had and going over what our next topic would be. Sophia, I don't know if you want to add to that real quick.
Yeah, so with each workshop, like Gabby mentioned, we did hand out a contract, but we always made sure to reiterate it at the very beginning of every single interactive activity that we did, just to make sure that people really understood like what the purposes of us being there were. And also, once again, while we were doing these workshops, the teachers acted as moderators and weren't necessarily like instructing with us.
Yeah. And another thing that we did is we really integrated, as you can see in some of these things and some of these workshop layouts, integrated like YouTube, like just YouTube instruction as well. So like videos that would define whether this was about microaggressions. So videos defining microaggressions, or videos defining in a short kind of visual way what like an implicit bias is. Because a lot of people get confused what implicit versus explicit bias is. And we all have implicit bias. But it's kind of hard to like identify what that is, especially in certain environments that people grow up in. So this is just the basic outline, and I'm going to actually, I think, could you still see this? Can you see like the presentation now?
Yeah.
Okay, so cool. I don't have to like stop sharing. Let me go back to present. Cool. Sophia.
Yes. So before we actually did workshops, we did have to do a lot of preparation in the background prior to anything that we did in front of other students, and just like in terms of any classroom presentation. And I did mention very briefly that we did do training, DEI training for the teachers and staff. And basically to ensure that they were also receiving the same kind of DEI education, they were basically briefed on the workshops prior to us coming to the classrooms. And we asked them to help us moderate maybe like prompt conversations, prompt discussions, because obviously sometimes it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get our peers to listen to us and participate, as and it would be easier for a teacher to help us in that light. And we also had a very specific guidelines and expectations for the staff's role. Participation was definitely a big deal, because if you are told that you need to like pay attention, engage in the presentation while your teacher is in the back of the room on their phone, that's not really going to send like a good message. So basically we really wanted teachers to also be involved while kind of supporting us and kind of staying not necessarily in the background, but just like making sure that we had a support system that didn't really interfere with the way that we were doing student-based work.
Yeah. And I think a good emphasis was like they were also part of the conversation most of the time. Like we encourage teachers to be like, as we're going over this, and you see it's a very like still classroom, like no one is talking and it's just frozen after the question is like said. And it was very awkward for us learning that, like how to like wait for someone to raise their hand, because that's a skill that I applaud teachers for. But having the teachers kind of start the conversation off if you see that going on. So just being very interactive. And we had certain rules. So we kind of changed this golden rule where it was like treat others how you want to be treated. And we changed it into treat others how they want to be treated, because necessarily not everyone wants to be treated the same way. And we realized that as we were doing this work, and kind of like stating that rule, it didn't work for what we were doing. So we wanted to emphasize like, you want to treat others with their boundaries and their circumstances, not with what you're comfortable with. And then we also took the Vegas rule and like kind of like interpreted with our thing. So what is learned here like leaves here, and what is said here stays here. Because at this time, there was a lot of like personal things that were being said in this meetings, especially if people are sharing their personal experiences with microaggressions, or sharing their personal experiences like growing up with all of these things that are happening to them, like discrimination and such. We wanted to make sure that those things weren't being talked about outside the class. You don't want your business being spread around the school. Like that's not fair to the persons, that's not fair to anyone. And it's honestly, it's disrespectful to them sharing. And we wanted everyone to share and feel comfortable sharing. But what you learn, you can take that out and tell other people and teach other people about those things that we were teaching them. And Sophia, I think you can talk about teachable moments, because I know you had a personal experience.
Yes. So we kind of like, I don't, if you, so basically we kind of like have this whole theme of open discussions, and that's kind of like the whole thing that we've been talking about. But sometimes in the discussion, some insensitive things can be shared, especially if you don't necessarily understand what we're talking about or like what the purpose of DEI is. So we always make sure not to really attack a person for saying something, but to make sure that we can teach from that instance. So for example, when we did a presentation on microaggressions and understanding privilege, I had a student raise their hand and say, I'm white, I'm a man, but I still don't think I'm privileged. And it was kind of difficult to go from there and be like, like, I'm not sure how to like explain to you like what this whole thing is. But instead of saying, you're wrong, never say that again, we kind of just had a discussion where I asked them why they would think that. And then I shared my experience as a woman of color and how kind of history intersects within that. And by the end of the conversation, they did change their thinking, and it was very positive and there were no real hard feelings. And I think that is what made DEI work so well. We never really attacked anyone for thinking the things that they thought. We just wanted to make sure that everyone knew and understood what we were trying to do.
And I think with that, it's like, you don't know how people grow up.
Yeah.
Because this new generation, I feel like, is growing up with a lot of like understanding and acceptance and everything like that. But you never know what someone's house environment is, what they talk about in that environment. And then sometimes certain schools can be like a culture shock.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that it's an educational type of conversation, not, like Sophia says, like attacking someone for something that they just thought their whole life or like assumed about their whole life.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
There's a difference between like educating and someone like genuinely asking a question and then saying something that is offensive. So just to be clear, like if someone did say something like that, we would ask the teacher to help us out in moderating that. But in terms of just like genuine questions and genuinely trying to understand what we were talking about, that is where we really prioritize like having a discussion.
I always say there's a difference between ignorance and then like willful ignorance.
Yeah.
So like that kind of like falls in that line as well. And one rule and another rule and agreement that we had was student DEI leaders will always present in pairs. Hence what me and Sophia are doing now, presenting in a pair. But it was just important because like, let's say someone got sick and then you had to fill in for that person and stuff like that. But we always wanted two people to be in a classroom because if one person doesn't know how to answer a question or gets like kind of caught up in what they're saying, then you have another person to help you. And it's just nice. So Sophia, please.
Yes. So this is our first like question and answer thing. We will have another one at the end. But if you have any questions based on like how we actually went about workshops and how I guess like how we organized them, how they were received, this is a really cool time for us to like talk about it. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask now.
Yeah, I would say you could, if you feel comfortable just unmuting and asking, or if you want to raise your hand, you can do that. But does anyone have any questions about what was talked about or maybe our experience? Yeah. Aaron, is it Aaron? I'm not good with
Aaron,
names.
thank you.
Okay.
I was really curious. I mean, this is amazing work. I'm so impressed with all of you. I'm really curious how you figured out the logistics with your school administrators. And was it like in a particular classroom that you did this with particular teachers? How did you choose the participants? And how did you work out all those like logistical details with your administrators?
So so when DEI started, it didn't initially look like this. We started just like as specific committees working on the curriculum. That's how I got involved. But then when we had our first town hall, we were like, hey, students kind of need a place to have this education and to share their voice. And that's where the workshops came about. But at first it was a long process because we needed a lot of support from teachers. And basically what we did is, I think it was it was either once a month or every other week or something. We would kind of go around the entire school, every single homeroom period, or every single homeroom class had a presentation each month. So every single student was able to get this. And yeah, we kind of just like worked with the teachers, and it was the hardest part really was figuring out the schedule and the calendar for every pair of presenters to find a way to get into every single classroom. So yeah, so we didn't really pick the audience or anything. We just went to every homeroom, if that answers your question.
And hold on, I'm gonna
Thank
add,
you.
I was gonna add to that real quick too. On top of that, like when it came to kind of meeting for these discussions, there was already like DEI teachers.
Yeah.
So our main teacher, I'm gonna like, which love her, Miss Har, she offered her classroom during her free period. And during this time, we had like a unique schedule. So we had like a homeroom period, but now like teachers will meet during their free periods or do like 2 meetings in one day, depending on when students have free periods, in their free periods, or meet after school. So I guess for now it would be meet after school. But it was basically meeting during the free period and kind of having 2 meetings a month, one scheduling everything and scheduling like the calendar and kind of like who's going to what classroom. And then the second meeting, which would happen in that week or the next week after that, before workshops would happen towards the end of the month, was doing a example presentation. So someone would participate, or a group of people, like the 2 pairs would go up and give an example of how this presentation should look like in a classroom. And then we would all discuss on what we could add or what we could like change about it, and then go forward with doing that in an actual classroom. So yeah. Any other questions?
Hi there, Gabby and Sophie. Thank you so much. This has been such a cool presentation and amazing to see like your slides and how you present as a team. It's stellar. So I feel like my question isn't fully formed, but I'm thinking about, I work in 440 in the Office of Strategic Partnerships. So we work with a lot of partners that are like outside the school, like after school programs or mentoring and stuff like that. And we have a student voice advisory board where we have like a couple students from a variety of schools that are coming together, and we try to get their input to try and make sure that the policies and things we're doing feel good to students, and that we give them a chance to have input on DEI. But I feel like this is only our second year, so we're kind of still building the group. And sometimes it feels like we don't fully have like the trust of all the students yet for them to be as open and honest. Like it's amazing, like the conversations that it sounds like you're having with your group. So I was just wondering if you had any recommendations for sort of like a newer group that's starting, and we don't have the ability like you have in one building to kind of like see each other so often. So it's just like once a month. So with that very vague context, do you have any recommendations, like if you were in that group of students, what would make you feel comfortable or make you want to come and participate in those types of conversations or lead them in a better way?
I think if like for me, what made me really comfortable was also hearing like the leaders' experiences. Like a lot of the time when we were leading, we opened up with our own experiences, like our own like type of, if we were talking about something, let's say like, which after this, we're gonna take you through an example workshop, and you guys are gonna be questions and answers and stuff like that. But let's say we were doing something on, I'm gonna say implicit and explicit bias. I would share an implicit bias I've had, like growing up and stuff like that. And even if it was like obviously state like, I don't feel this way anymore and stuff like that. But this was something that was a hard belief of mine. I grew up like in a very religious household, so I had a lot of implicit biases for the LGBT community, and my school is very like LGBT focused. But I shared that, and that usually like kind of breaks a little bit of the ice of like comfortability, because you see that someone else is comfortable with sharing kind of hard experiences, especially since they're leading the discussion. And now you kind of have a room of people feeling like a little bit more comfortable sharing. Sophia, I don't know if you had.
Yeah, I was going to say a similar thing, like sharing experiences, especially if they're kind of more difficult or sensitive things to share, definitely helps the group feel more comfortable just like in that environment. Like, for example, with the microaggressions presentation, before I asked students to like identify microaggressions if they had ever experienced them or something like that, I shared times where I had experienced micro and macroaggressions even within my school. And that, I think, really helped students feel comfortable talking about specific issues within our school, because we didn't really have a space to do that prior. So that really helped. and just like being honest, I guess, with it was really good to help, like, I don't know, just cultivate the environment.
And one thing that was also helpful was like the activities, because we had like a lot of like in our first workshop about identity, we had like a printout of an identity wheel, and that was interesting for students to actually see like certain identities listed and kind of like fill in kind of like where they stand, if that makes sense. And also another thing was like integrating like YouTube videos and things of that nature that explained it in like kind of like a fun way. Not a fun way, that's probably not the right way to say it, but like like a visually nice way. And it just helped the conversation flow. I hope that helps your like question or answer.
Definitely. Thank you both so much. I appreciate you.
Of course. Thank you. Yes. Last question before we move on.
Quick question. Thank you both so much for this presentation. I've already learned a lot. I'm just wondering, in terms of, you hold these for students, have you ever, I know you're going to run us through the workshop as a group, but have you had experiences where you did this for teachers, and how did that go in terms of kind of like breaking that power dynamic and having those authentic conversations?
So I can actually speak. So I'm sure Sophia was gonna say, we never presented to teachers. Like we never happened. And I wish we did, but our DEI leader teachers, who we really trusted, presented usually and talked about these things. One difficult thing I had to do, which Sophia, you didn't come with me. I think it was Amber. She was like another person who was like a senior at the time and I was a junior. We went to a teacher meeting. And we had to, in a polite way, tell the teachers that they're not really helping us when we're presenting, and kind of like not get your act together, but kind of like you need to be also participating in these conversations, which is what we brought out. Like there were some teachers on their phone, there were some teachers doing like other things, and it just was distracting. And it, like, if students saw that the teacher didn't really care or prepare them for when we were coming in, it created a classroom that was not ready for any of this, and it was really hard to get the learning through. So one thing when it came to kind of like addressing the teachers was like addressing kind of, hey, we kind of need your help. So that was my experience with that. Sophia, I don't know if you wanted to add anything before.
Yeah, I also wish that we had been able to like present to teachers, but it kind of made sense at the time why the DEI teacher leaders did that instead. But basically every workshop that they did was associated with the work that we were doing to students. So they would basically use everything that we had been working on and just kind of reworked it a little bit to make it more directed at teachers. So yeah, we kind of more, we weren't as involved in the direct instruction on that front, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. There should be, I feel like that should be integrated though. But time for a mini workshop. And this workshop is actually what is explicit and implicit bias. So we're going to take you through, and you guys are going to be answering questions and stuff like that. Kind of like what we've done in the classroom. Like this is an exact, like not an exact, I took some stuff out, but exact replica of kind of what we did. So to start things off, we're going to watch a video on implicit bias, and it's called Peanut Butter Jelly Racism. Interesting video. I'm going to share my screen with sound this time, and you guys let me know if you can hear it.
Implicit bias.
Can you hear that? Okay, cool. Let me just think it's up enough.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Oh, yeah. So real quick, sorry, forgot to mention, take mental notes because we are going to be discussing this video and kind of like what you guys saw.
When Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term right here in American society. A lot of times when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there is an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem. One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's a scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
Yeah, so that was one of the videos that we showed, and now we're gonna have a discussion on the video. Let me go back to present real quick. I'm so sorry because I forgot how to present for a second. There we go. So yeah, after seeing that video, we can have probably 2 to 3 people answer probably the first, one person answer the first 2 questions. But starting off, after seeing the video, what is implicit bias and where does implicit bias come from? And anyone can unmute and answer right away. We don't have to do raising hands.
I could go. Implicit bias is like these associations that we have. They're often like stereotypes, I think, where it's like something that you assume about a type of person, or peanut butter jelly, I guess, is like a not a biased example, but I think it's the idea of 2 things that we associate with closely with one another. And I think they come from the media, they come from what we hear people talking about, they come from shows that we watch and where we see these things repeated over and over. And generally, I think they're like negative leaning and have make us unconsciously think bad things about groups of people.
Exactly. Is it okay? Do you want Miss Madeline, or is Madeline okay? Because I was
Madeline's fine.
Okay, cool. So exactly, Madeline, they come from a lot of different places. I know for me personally, a lot of my implicit biases now come from media, because there's a lot of false things that are going on in media. I think especially just talking about the pandemic and the elections in 2020, what with Trump and everything like that, politics, a lot of those negative things come across. That's where the whole implicit bias of associating Asian people with COVID-19 came from as well. And that was a big thing. And it's media kind of portrays all of these different ideals and kind of these different standards for different groups of people. And after consuming it for so long, you start having those same thoughts about those same groups of people. So thank you so much for answering and sharing. Next question, which Madeline kind of answered, which is, how are peanut butter and jelly related to implicit bias?
Hello, everyone. If I may, is it a form of just word association? You say peanut butter, jelly, black, white, that's where I'm getting it from. And to the previous question, I would just say, is it just a form of brainwashing? Just a simple word brainwashing, period, And this is where we are today, the effects of all that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. I never heard implicit bias be like considered brainwashing, but that is interesting. And I definitely agree with that. That was the first time I'm hearing about that. But yeah, it is a form of like associating two words together. Kind of just like this person associated with this person, or this like certain group of people associated with this activity. But yeah, we already covered how does this association play out in kind of like news media a little bit. So we're going to move on. And Sophia, you got this.
Yes. So do you think you've grown up with implicit biases based on the media you consume, conversations you've had with friends or family, or the education setting you come from? And when have you experienced implicit bias, and what situations have contributed to it? So I can share my example, which was kind of similar to Gabby's. I went to a very conservative Catholic school. And basically we were taught that anyone who kind of thinks or acts or behaves in a way that isn't necessarily a reflection of the Bible was evil, which isn't necessarily true, because obviously so many different people have different walks of life. That's not really how it works. You're not just evil for not believing in God or not believing in the Christian God. And it kind of took me a while to break out of that mentality, because I did go to Catholic school until I was probably like 13. And then I immediately went to CAPA, where it wasn't affiliated with religion. Obviously, it's a public school. And yeah, so that is definitely a major example. And that is something that we heard from a lot of students who shared as well. So that was both my home environment and also my school environment. So if you guys are comfortable with sharing, I would love for you guys to like unmute and just share maybe one example, or maybe just an example that you've seen. It doesn't necessarily have to be your own.
And
But
we'll
yeah.
take like 1 to 2 people for this.
Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you both for leading this session. So I have a name, first name, Dawn Lynn, which I was born and raised in New York City, but I moved to Georgia for my senior year of high school, and people by my name assumed that I was from the South, because apparently having two first names is a very Southern thing. But when I would open my mouth and speak, it was very clear I was not from the South. I had a very, very strong New York accent. And then I received a lot of judgments and presumptions about where I was from because of how I sounded, because I would say to people, no, I'm not from the South, when they would hear me speak. And then there was this complete flip of how people perceived me and what they expected my experience to be. And so I found that to be very interesting, as well as like how that was not something that I had experienced previously, even though I grew up in the North and had what some would consider to be a Southern name, until I actually moved to the South, into Georgia. And people made these presumptions about just a name, and then your accent, until they heard you speak. And just, that was, I think, the first time that I really had this sense of the North versus the South, which is a different aspect of this, but certainly very powerful for someone who's, in high school.
Thank you so much. And thank you for using that example, because our next slide is actually going to be talking about names. So this is good. Okay, so this is an example of one of the studies that we use in one of our real workshops that has to do with implicit and explicit bias. Okay, so the situation. Emails were sent to real professors, real universities, with different names, languages, and different names and languages to see who would warrant the most responses, specifically positive responses. So white male names using standard English in the email received more responses than any other category. So this is including female presenting names, those using AAVE, slang, anything like that. So we want to basically discuss how this is, or which kind of bias this is, explicit or implicit, because there's a lot going into this, and it can sometimes be confusing with which is which. So if we can have a volunteer answer these two questions, do you view this as explicit or implicit, and why? That would be awesome.
I think for me, it could be both. I think it just depends on the perspectives of the person responding. Donlin, when you gave your example, it made me think when I was younger, there was a student, his name was Osama, and after September 11th, all the kids and even teachers you could tell were a little uncomfortable around him and would call him Bin Laden and different things. And I think in some ways that was very explicit, associating his name with terrorism or whatever it may be. But I do think something more subtle like this, where it's like, oh, a male sounding name versus a female sounding name, it may not be intentional. I'm going to respond more to men than women. But it might be like a behind the scenes kind of programming. I do like the term brainwashing. Thinking back to what was said earlier, that kind of leans you to gravitate towards one identity versus the other, maybe.
Yes, thank you. I like that you said that it could be either or, because that is usually the answer for like a lot of these things. And it all depends on like kind of the reaction, I guess, like you mentioned. Like this could be implicit because it could just be like them thinking this out of nowhere and then just randomly deciding to go with this name instead of the other, or it could be them thinking this name sounds like the only qualified name. I'm going to choose this because I don't think any other race or gender could be qualified for this position. So yeah.
It also reminds me of, we had a student and her name was really unique. Her name was Cinnamon Stoner. And a lot of people did not respond to that name whenever she shared a lot of experience, especially when we started talking about this activity. She shared a lot of experience of people not responding in an email just because of her name, which she can't change in any circumstance. But because of her name, a lot of people didn't take her email seriously just by looking at it.
Yeah.
And yeah,
sorry,
so
we also had one of our counselors told her that when she's applying to college, she should use a different name in her email address because they might think that it's like a spam email or a joke. And that definitely is like 100% exactly what we're talking about.
But yeah, so for time's sake, we're gonna close off a little bit today. So review, we went over like where do we see bias taking place, so like social media you interact with, the entertainment you consume, assumptions you make about other people's speech and things of that nature, especially about people's names. And the final question to kind of just give out to you guys for you guys to answer is, what portions of your identity do you think takes places in positions of privilege and what do not? So we have some examples of privilege up here. For me, it would be my first language was English. I had free education and just access to technology. We don't realize that these things could be privilege things, but we kind of think of like black and white as kind of like the standard, but there's other things that are incorporated in this. And Sophia, I don't know if you want to share your examples.
Yeah. So I'm cisgender. I also have the opportunity to go to a really good school for free. I have housing security, access to technology, and I also am a member of a dominant religion in this country. So yeah.
So does anyone want to share some examples of privilege that they think their identity is in which are not?
My excuse me. My only comment is this: when we assume, just like both you young ladies said, you have access to different things. People have the same access, but at what level do they get true access? You know, we deal with a school system where everybody's supposed to have access to technology, but do they really have access to technology? And it's proven when we had the COVID of where there's still no data on the COVID, you know, virtual at home, which is really an invasion of the home. That's a form of access that truly everybody doesn't share equally, you know, and so we can take that and go down the line with a few other things like free education. You know, we talk about free education, but we still got children like 2 weeks ago at an education meeting, a student said to a city council person, "I can't read." So this is a 12th grader that can't read that had access to free education. So those who are fortunate to really benefit from these things is fine, but a lot of things, we all get caught up in the categories, and next thing you know, they just use people as numbers. Like here again, you got 110,000 students that have access to free education, access to food, access to everything, but yet 90% of them are designated under the poverty level. So that's just my comment on this thing.
No, of course. And
Yes.
that's a topic that has been brought up with this before, but the whole point of this is to kind of recognize where you stand with the privilege that you have in terms of other people, because a lot of people don't understand that they are privileged in other ways that are not just like the color of your skin or kind of like the ethnicity that you are part of. And sometimes that places them in positions where it's like they don't recognize that, so then they don't acknowledge it. And then you have situations where it's not acknowledged and you're kind of bringing other people down rather than kind of coming to an equal standing.
Yes, and thank you so much for bringing up those examples, because this also goes into the difference between equality and equity, and how, like, yes, we do have access to these, but like you said, like how much access is really equitable for everyone, and also just intersectional privileges, because the way I have this privilege might not be the same as another person. But yeah, if we have any other people willing to share, that would be awesome. Oh, it's already 10:52, but it's okay.
This is an amazing session, I swear. I can share quickly. I think I'm lighter skinned, although I'm a person of color. Like, I think being light skinned offers me some privileges navigating this country. I'm cisgender. I think I fit in more with heteronormative culture. And although English wasn't my first language, I speak it without an accent. And I think that helps me navigate society in this country a lot more easily.
Yeah, so with that, thank you. Our next workshop will be, we don't have a next workshop, but however, like, we don't have enough time for questions at the moment, but I see that Michelle put in kind of where you can put your questions in for us, and I'll give the thing to Michelle. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
For everything. A pleasure.
This was a wonderful session. Thank you both so much. Thank you.
Great session. Great
Before you log off, I have a few things for you. If this is the only session you're joining today, please take a moment and fill out the survey that I'm dropping in the chat. This will also be emailed to you afterwards. Something else that we're going to include in a follow-up email is the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion's Equity Coalition is hosting a monthly series of lunch and learn events called Equity in Practice. They will also be recorded and made available for folks who are not available at lunchtime. And I'm dropping a flyer as well. You all found this, so I'm assuming you have your presentation catalogs and that you will be able to navigate to your next sessions, which will start in 5 minutes, and hopefully will not have the technical difficulties that we had right now. So you're welcome. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Gabby and Sophia, for your amazing work. You are incredible.